My guest today is Katie Fogarty, who is the host of a Certain Age podcast, which I love. I listen to every week. She's also a career coach, and she started an online community on Instagram called Age Out Loud, which we should all be doing. Hi, Katie. Welcome to GRUFFtalk.
Barbara, thank you so much for having me. I love connecting with fellow podcasters.
Yeah, no, this is really fun. And you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. So you can, I'm sure, teach me a couple of tips and hacks. We'll talk offline about that. But I always love to know, where are you calling in from?
I live on the North Shore of Long Island, right on Manhasset Bay.
Okay, that's great. So I'm normally in New York City, but today I'm in Virginia. I go back and forth, as a lot of the listeners already know. But listen, let's talk about our favorite topic, which is aging better and graceful aging and aging out loud and all that good stuff. And I had my aha moment, if you want to call it that, when I was about 50. And I was starting to put on a few postmenopausal pounds, and then I was feeling really sorry for myself. And then I took my dog for a walk and I fell. It wasn't really a hard fall. It was kind of an easy, one of the slow motion falls. And yet I did break my arm, only to find out that I had low bone density, which is like a stop on the fast track to osteoporosis, which nobody really wants to have, because if you fall, you could fracture so much more easily. And so all of these things were happening really as a result of going through menopause and getting a little bit older. And there was that moment in time for me, Katie, when I said, all right, Barbara, you can either put that proverbial blanket over your head and stay there and stay on the path you're on, or you can take a pivot and take control of everything that you can control. Well, the good news for me is that I took that second thought, and I, have never looked back. So I've really been trying to control everything I can. I wrote my first book, The Best of Everything After 50, shortly thereafter. So that was a real pivot for me in my life, for sure, but also in my career. I had a whole career in magazine publishing and in the international conference world before doing this. So you are the queen of pivot. You talk about pivoting a lot. You yourself have taken a few pivots and made career shifts, and you have wonderful guests on your show talking about how they have successfully, shifted from one thing to another. So, Katie, tell us about your background and what caused you to become this really wonderful, loud voice for women in midlife.
Well, Barbara, such a great question. And that sounds like a really challenging time that you went through. And it's not surprising to me that when you learned, some of the health challenges that were going on, that you looked at it as an opportunity to get smarter, to educate yourself, to reinvent, and to really bring this information to midlife women. Because I think we share that in common, looking to put resources, education, and tools in the hand of women so that they can thrive during this next phase of life. My career has had multiple pivots. I'm a big believer that change is not just possible, that it's probable, that we move through different stages of life when things happen that put us into new lanes. I've had about a dozen different jobs since I graduated from college, many decades ago. I'm now 53. And currently I wear two hats. I have a career coaching business where I work with senior executives and teams at organizations to make them better at sharing their career stories. And I also have a podcast that focuses on midlife. You talked about it at the top of the show. It's called A Certain Age. It's a show that helps women live midlife out loud. I feature two types of guests. They are women who are reinventing in this new act. They are either reinventing their careers, perhaps they're reinventing their fitness, their relationships. And I feature women who are experts at helping other women thrive. So I feature a lot of doctors, fitness trainers, pelvic floor therapists, experts on midlife intimacy and sex. And I launched this show in part because of my day job. So very quickly, the through line between the career coaching work that I do and the conversations that I'm having on the podcast is that my day job put me, in conversation every week with people who are concerned about ageism, that really feared that getting older meant the loss of relevancy, the loss of marketability, the loss of currency in the job world. And I just felt like that story is dated and tired. Getting older does not diminish your relevancy. It enhances your expertise and your wisdom and your experience and all the good stuff. So that's how my two jobs are connected.
So you've really seen it all, heard a lot from both your day job coaching women, but also listening to all of the guests, the wonderful guests that you've had on your show since you started. How long ago did you start the show?
I just did my 130th episode. So
Yay!
I'm pretty proud.
Let's do a little yay.
Yes, it's my third year. I will say, I will share with your audience that when I launched this show
during the pandemic, may I add? I
did it during the pandemic, and I really had no expectation that it would grow the way it did and that it would keep going. So, I feel like it's important to share. Like, for anyone who's listening to your show, who's tuning in, who's thinking, they want to see something, a change in their lives, they want to make a pivot. You don't have to know where the end is to get started. And I recorded 130 shows. I started in 2020. The podcast is now listened to in 117 countries across almost 7,000 cities around the world. So it's really opened some surprising doors. It's being listened to by a surprising audience. I've worked with incredible brands, a lot of midlife brands that come on to be sponsors of the show. And it's been an exciting and kind of surprising, second act.
I'm not surprised at all because there's been such a gap, I think, in the market, in the world for information, for good information, for right information for women to navigate midlife. So I'm not surprised. And you have a, wonderful way about you. And as I told you before we started recording, you're a great interviewer. I do listen to your podcast and I go, yes, that was a great question, Katie.
I love it. Thank you,
so
Barbara.
you really have heard a lot. You've heard kind of like run the gamut. And what are some of the biggest psychological challenges or obstacles that women in midlife confront?
I think that there's, it's interesting recording the show, talking to all these different amazing women that come on my podcast. I actually hear a lot about sort of the upside of midlife. I hear a lot about the confidence of midlife, the resilience of midlife. And, women who have gotten to the north side of 40, have all lived through something hard. The entire globe has lived through a pandemic. We all taught ourselves that we can pivot overnight. So, I do think there is a lot of confidence and resilience in midlife, and I do hear that. I guess the other side of that coin might be that sometimes there is, if we pay too much attention to sort of cultural messages, we can sometimes feel diminished as we age. And that can feel hard. There are changes that occur to midlife bodies. Navigating menopause is no joke for a lot of women. Perimenopause and menopause really does a number on your hormones, your mindset, your mental health. I know that women often struggle with changing relationships. If you're a mother, as your kids age and move out of the house, that can feel really overwhelming and challenging. Midlife marriages and intimacy are often reconsidered.
Yes.
In midlife, as you either decide to double down and go for the long haul with your partner because you're excited about this phase, but sometimes relationships change. So there can be a lot of anxiety around the changes in midlife. But
let's not forget aging parents are very often part of the picture as well.
Yeah, 100%. We
for a lot of women
are the sandwich generation, women, and men, in this age demographic, in this modern, very busy, always on world, have multiple, pressures that surround them. So, I do think there is a lot of confidence and resilience that we naturally get when we arrive in midlife, but we can also be a little confounded by some of the new challenges that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I always think it's very inspiring and motivating to hear from other women, and not just celebrities and that kind of ilk, but just real women who are working their way through the sometimes, as you said, confounding parts of being in midlife and beyond. So, and your show really does help a lot.
Thank you.
You know, kudos to you for that. But you have had some amazing guests on, again, across the gamut. What have been some of the most eye-opening, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that kind of tips or information that you've gotten over the last 3 years? Any come to mind?
I learn something on every show.
Yeah, me too.
Like, I learn something on every show, and I'm actually astonished by how little information there is about menopause and caring for like the aging female body as we get older. I mean, I think I trusted doctors. I trusted Western medicine. I assumed that, you know, the people who went to med school were looking out for me. And what I've learned from even, you know, from the multiple doctors who've come on the show, that there's very little training. There's very little research about the impacts of menopause across, you know, important systems like our brain, our heart, our bones. And
very big, important thing for me.
The hard way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, so my biggest takeaway was I was surprised by, you know, how much of a self-advocate you need to be. You need to educate yourself about what's going on in your body. And I would recommend to any one of your listeners to find yourself a certified menopause specialist to help with your healthcare, because menopause crosses every organ of our body. We've got estrogen receptors on our brain, every aspect of our body. And so when estrogen rolls out of town, which it does when we go through menopause, there are impacts. And so you want to educate yourself. So that's sort of a big picture.
And I just want to say that the way to find out, one of the easiest ways to find a menopause specialist is by going to NAM's website. That's the North American Menopause Society website. And I believe it's menopause.org. And they do have a section listing menopause specialists in your area.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, when you find one, also spread the word, you know, pass it on to the women in your life, because we all need to be working with doctors who get it. So that's my number one. I think personally, you know, regular listeners on my show know that I still brush my teeth standing on one foot, and I alternate because
I love it. So do I, Katie. We have so much in common.
You know what? I love it. I mean, it's a funny hack, and I picked it up from Dr. Vonda Wright, who was one of my early guests, and she is an orthopedic surgeon and an expert in bone health. And so she shared that balance starts to deteriorate, you know, actually at a very surprisingly young age. This happened several decades ago. It starts to sort of deteriorate, but it becomes more of an issue as we get older. And if we fall over and our bones have become brittle due to things like menopause, that's when you have, you know, very big impacts like broken bones and hip fractures, et cetera. So,
you know, people, when they think about bone health, they really think about just kind of keeping their bones healthy, which of course is important. And there are a lot of ways to do that. And I also always encourage everyone go to the Osteoporosis Foundation website, Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation website. For more information and up-to-date information. But balance is so essential, because we don't think about that as it relates to bone health. If you fall and your bones are a little bit weaker, which they will most likely be if you've gone through menopause and you haven't had hormone therapy to replace the lost estrogen, they're more easy to fracture if you fall. So you don't want to fall. Balancing on one foot as you're brushing your teeth, standing in line at the store. Great idea, Katie. Yeah. What else? What other tips have you got?
No, these simple little hacks, and it's, you know, it's smart to just start to. I had a wonderful guest who came on to talk also about the importance of muscle building in midlife, because that also supports our muscular skeletal health, and muscle building is a wonderful fat burning mechanism, which can help keep our bodies. You know, it's not about being skinny, but it's about having optimal, you know, health for your particular physique, and so it's so important to do things like build muscle. And, you know, your musculoskeletal health, because what you do today is going to impact your health in 10 years. And we all want to feel incredible in 10 years. We want to be shoving overhead luggage into airplanes as we like travel the world and have adventures and, you know, keep going. So those have been things that I've really learned. And I will say this one other thing really sticks with me. I had this wonderful anthropologist who came on the show. Her name is Dr. Helen Fisher. She is a scientific expert on
quite
love.
famous.
She's incredible. And she is the chief science officer of Match.com, and she is an academic researcher, and she puts long-term partnered couples together in ultra long-term relationships, meaning 20 plus years. And she has proven scientifically that love and arousal and desire can continue in long relationships. So you can be married for 20 plus years and still feel desire for your partner. And I thought that was such a fabulous thing to learn, because pop culture will often tell you that things like love fade. I think we all need to stop listening to the messages that are being given to us by culture and media. But I thought that was such a fun, I'm in an ultra long-term relationship. I'm 53 and I've been dating my husband since we met when we were seniors in college. So it was nice to hear.
Oh, that's wonderful. and I'm sure you know, Katie, that you have to always reinvent your relationship. And that's something that I learned from Esther Perel, who has also become quite famous over the last 10 years since I first interviewed her for my first book. She has her own podcast, and she, like Helen Fisher, she also believes that you can have a relationship, a long-term relationship. You just need to kind of rethink it as you go along together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first step is understanding that it's possible, because I think that many of us fall victim to a lot of myths around aging. And like one of the myths might be that a long-term partnered relationship's not going to keep going forever. And so if you take that as a starting point, you might not invest in it. So we need to do myth busting around things like, we also, Dr. Von der Wright, who I mentioned earlier, says that falling apart's not inevitable. You can continue to build muscle, bone health up into your 70s.
Actually, into your 80s, according to Dr. Jordan Metzl.
And if we think like fitness is not possible after a certain point, like maybe we're sitting on the sofa eating Doritos, So
exactly.
if we fall prey to these myths around what it means to age and to age vibrantly, then, we're getting off on the wrong foot. So I think a lot of what I love doing on my shows is sort of myth busting around aging. And I do that also in career, because I think that's another place where people feel like, oh, I'm a certain age, it's impossible to get a new job or switch lanes or, try something new. And that's not always the case. In fact, it's often not the case.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Tell us about I think it's new, your community on Instagram, Age Out Loud. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I launched at a certain age, as I said, 130 shows ago. It comes out every single Monday, virtually every Monday. It takes, breaks around the holiday. But I very quickly learned I could be talking to an incredible woman in midlife every day. Midlife awesomeness, midlife reinvention, midlife resilience is a 24/7, 365 days a year situation, right? And so I wanted to spotlight a greater range of stories than I can simply do on the podcast. So, and I also wanted it to be opt-in, because on the podcast, if I have a dermatologist on one Monday, I'm not going to have another one next. I need to kind of have a variety of topics.
Sure.
So I created a sister account to the podcast. It's called Age Out Loud, and you can find it on Instagram at Let's Age Out Loud. And people can opt in. There's a very simple link that you can click through. You can share your story. You can upload your pictures. You can tell us how you've reimagined midlife and the difference, what you're up to, what you've let go of, how you've grown, how you've evolved. And it's been so incredibly fun. I love seeing the stories get populated. People I don't know are dropping in and sharing themselves with us. And I think it's so important because I just find it incredibly fun and inspiring to hear the stories of women and what they're up to. But I also know that the data shows that when we feel positive and excited and optimistic around aging, it's, this, it's like, I think it was Professor Levy from Yale who found that you can add multiple years to your life.
That's right.
You feel optimistic around aging. This has been proven by data.
Yeah.
So
there's a new study that just came out. I just happened to see something about it in one of the million medical newsletters that I get every day. And it just came out with a different scientist behind it about how thinking positively, especially in a relationship, actually, in this case, and all of your relationships around you will add years to your life and add to your health span, which is really important.
Totally. And to me, it's such a no-brainer. You want to feel optimistic. You want to get out of the out in the morning, excited about what's next. And when we feel positive and we see other examples of people aging vibrantly and proudly and happily, I just think it's so good for your mental health, and the data backs that up.
Absolutely. And I think that women want to be heard also. And this gives them, a way to be heard and a way to also communicate with each other. And we all learn from each other too. So really great. And I see that it's been growing. So congratulations on that.
It has been growing.
I also follow that. I follow you everywhere, Katie. I hope you know that. So
I love it, Barbara.
Are you seeing any new trends? I mean, what are you seeing? Like, you talk to women in your day job as a career coach. You're seeing now all of these comments from women on your new Instagram community, Age Out Loud. And of course, your podcast. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing? Anything new that women are thinking about, maybe even worrying about? I know there's resilience, all this positivity. We want to kind of keep with that. But, a lot of us have some fears too, like financial fears, which I'm going to be focusing on actually in an upcoming podcast. So what are you seeing?
I will have to tune into that. I have seen, since I launched the podcast and really started paying attention to this, I've seen a sea change in the way women talk about menopause. I mean, there have been a number of new companies that have started to address this, from physical products to, e-medicine, from telehealth. There's a change in the conversation. You see celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow investing in menopause companies. You see celebrities like Naomi Watts, co-founding menopause companies. So I think that Stacey London has been the OG around this.
Absolutely.
She's coming on to record a show with me. It's coming out in the next week or two. So there's just been a sea change around menopause. But what I think is newly happening as well is this visibility and change around aging in general and midlife in general. And you see this from what happened with the awards season. We saw a lot of actresses that are 60 plus, like Jamie Lee Curtis or Michelle Yeoh, winning.
By the way, that was a great movie. Did you see that movie?
Yes, I did. It's phenomenal.
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
I need to watch it again, actually, because it's like
so
much stuff happens that I need to see it again. But,
I know. It was one of those movies that you cannot walk away and say, "Oh, let me go get the popcorn. I'll be right back." You cannot,
because then you're confused.
You have to stay focused. I really loved it. I loved it.
But we see a little bit of that starting to change too. But I also see celebrities like Paulina Porzakova, who I think has written a wonderful book that everyone should add to cart instantly. It's called No Filter. And it's about her sort of take on, identity, beauty, celebrity. She has wonderful mini essays that she shares regularly on Instagram. And she uses a wonderful hashtag called between J-Lo and Betty White. That's also sexy, has no expiration date. So we see this sort of concept that women
pro-aging,
are not just
age positivity.
It's age positivity. And it's also just the fact that you can continue to be sexy and you can continue to be relevant and marketable and you can continue to be dynamic and you can continue to be fit and fashionable as you age.
Yep.
Right.
But Katie, I have to tell you something. When I had that aha moment I told you about early on, when I turned 50 and all this happened to me, and then I shifted gears and wrote the first book, I really was a lone voice in the wilderness at that time. It was 2010 that the first book came out, and it was all about embracing your age, not fighting your age, actually saying your age out loud, aging out loud and all this good stuff that we're talking about now.
We're going to talk about that.
And really, at that point, we were still very, very much in the era of anti-aging. I mean, everything was about how not to look your age. That's not to say we don't want to look great as we can, whatever age we are. I mean, I'm totally for that. But it was really, I was a lone voice in the wilderness. So for me personally, it is so wonderful to see this kind of uprising of so many other voices talking about not, things that were then still taboo, like menopause, as you just pointed out, but also aging, just aging in general. There's a lot of right, exactly. There's been a lot of, I think there has been a bit of a sea change in the conversation around what we could talk about. But I also just feel like that, to me, what I think is I've seen over even the last 3 years, it's just that people are allowed to age as their whole selves, and you can still be, as I said, sexy or
marketable or active or vibrant in ways that, you're not, I don't think women were allowed to be in the past, or even men, honestly. Well, actually, men have been allowed to age forever. I mean,
yeah.
All right, this is not. I'm not trying to be anti-male, but
no, we're definitely not anti-male, but there are double standards here. I think we can both.
Women. It's been harder, and women have not been allowed to. And there's that sort of.
We haven't been allowed to age out loud.
You haven't been allowed.
That's why it's a great name for your community.
And you also haven't been allowed to, you are mocked if you allow your hair to go gray, or perhaps fired from your job. But you are not allowed to try to look young, because then you become ridiculous. So there is this double standard that I do believe still exists that we need to continually push back against, because it's sexist and ageist, and, we're done. We're done with it.
We're done with that. For me, it all comes back to a few very key things, and that is to do everything you can to control your health by exercising, moving your body more, eating the right things, not eating the things you shouldn't be eating. Just, really taking good care of yourself, because that will really help you to feel better, look better, live better, and age better.
Yeah, it gives you all the choices.
Right,
health is wealth. We all
for
know
sure.
That.
And, as my personal goal is now, is to be mobile and independent for as long as possible. That's my end game.
I'm with you, Barbara. I'm
right?
Here for functional fitness. I'm not joking. I want to be able to put my luggage in the overhead compartment of an airplane, or pick up grandkids at some point.
And for me, I guess I have, yes, for sure. But I also want to be running, I'm running 2 marathons later in the year. I have a tear in my hamstring right now. So I can't run again. I just got a PRP injection, which I talked about in my last episode, but, I can't run again until another 6 weeks, but that's okay. I'm doing other things, but I'm running New York City. I started running at the age of 50. And so far, I've run 15 marathons, and I've got a lot more ahead of me. So for me to be able to do that, I got to keep taking good care of myself. But anyway.
Of course. I love it.
And I also want to be able to put that luggage over in the airplane. No question about it. Katie, this has been a great conversation. You are wonderful. You are delightful. I love your podcast. There will be links in the show notes so that people can follow you on Instagram, of course. Let's Age Out Loud. It'll all be there in the show notes, also on my website. But what are the 3 things you really want the Gruff Talk audience to take away from our conversation today?
I would say one, continue to follow social media, books, podcasts, conversations that make you feel seen and supported, because there are anti-aging messages that are out there. So clean up your social media feeds, follow accounts that are pro-aging, that are age positive. Listen to Barbara's show, listen to A Certain Age podcast, and make sure that you are surrounding yourself with content that celebrates you and doesn't diminish you. So that would be number 1. Number 2, I would just say, it's never too late to try something new. And I launched my podcast 35 days before I turned 51, and I'm surprised by where it's taken me and where it continues to. So if there's a long simmering dream that you've been hanging on to, now is the time. Right.
Be fearless.
And I guess it'd be fearless. And I would also just say, what I have learned is, you can be uncomfortable and do it anyway. So, if there's something, don't let your fear of trying something new hold you back from something that you may really enjoy. And
I love that tip.
For number 4 is just keep aging out loud with me. I don't want to do it alone.
Yay! Katie, I'm right there with you. In fact, I'm way ahead of you. I'm 66 and God bless us, right?
I'm running 5 marathons, so it's all right. Anything is possible. So,
thank you so much, Katie. I hope that you'll come back on again. This was a lot of fun. I'll talk to you soon.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks, Barbara.